Well, let me bring you right up to date with all the main elements of the coronavirus outbreak. And we're going to start in Italy because all schools and universities will close on Thursday and they'll stay closed until the 15th of March. The number of cases in Italy is now past 3,000 and 107 people have died. In addition, Reuters has seen a draft government proposal that includes cinemas and theatres closing and that may also involve a suspension of events of any nature that entail the concentration of people and do not allow for a safety distance of at least 1 metre to be respected. Here's Bethany Bell in Milan.
You may remember that schools and universities in the north of the country, areas which have been hit the hardest by the coronavirus, have been closed for a number of days already. Now it appears the government has taken the step to close them across the country. Some people say the government has really acted far too slowly. It should have taken much more stringent measures earlier on. Others say no, it did take stringent measures. It locked down some of the towns in the north, these 11 towns in the north where the outbreak was first detected. And other people say, yes, we're worried about this in terms of health, but what about our economy as well? This is having a terrible impact on business here, on tourism. So you have very, very varying ideas, and now that it seems that children won't be in school, there will be questions about childcare issues, what that means for people going about their day-to-day work. Many, many questions here, and people very, very uncertain as to how long this is going to go on for and what it's going to do to their country.
Well, the northern regions of Veneto and Lombardy have been the focus of Italy's outbreak. We know there are already 2 quarantine so-called red zones, while a third around the city of Bergamo is also being considered. And already 8 Chinese restaurant workers who are based in that city have travelled back to their homes in the city of Guangzhou in China. And since then, they've all tested positive. Bear in mind, of course, the virus originated in China, and of the 92,000 cases worldwide, 80,000 are in China, but the number of new cases there has been falling, and of course authorities want to keep it that way. Let's hear from Wanyuan Song from BBC Reality Check on the story of these 8 people.
Chinese authorities call those cases backflow cases. Those are the people who contracted the virus outside China and bring it back. The 8 Chinese workers returned from Italy worked for the same restaurant, and they are all from the city of Wenzhou. 6 of them traveled via Moscow to Shanghai and on to Wenzhou. 1 case flight through Germany. The Chinese authorities are worried about those cases. They have traced down a dozen of people who has had contact with those workers returned back. There are an estimated 100,000 Wenzhou workers in Italy. China worries about those backflow cases, as 2 cases confirmed in Beijing recently are people returned from Iran. There are at least 5 backflow cases in China now, and the number is still increasing.
Let's move from China to Israel, because there the authorities have issued a quarantine order for people coming in from a range of European countries: Austria, Germany, France, Switzerland and Spain. So far, Israel has 15 cases. Already it's barred people travelling from Italy. Let's hear from Anna Foster, who's in Jerusalem.
Now, even as that announcement was being made, we know there are at least 10 flights in the air from those countries heading here. So people will arrive at Ben Gurion Airport to be told that they need to go into immediate self-quarantine for 14 days. Now, the other big announcement that was made is that gatherings here in Israel of more than 5,000 people will be banned, which raises an awful lot of questions. You've got here the Teddy Stadium, where Beitar Jerusalem, the football team, play their home games. Now, whether or not they will go ahead behind closed doors, we don't know, but people will not be able to gather en masse in this stadium. Speaking of questions, you've got over here the mall. Now, this has 2,000 parking spaces, so we know for a fact that at certain times of the week when it's full, there will be at least 5,000 people in there. But what we don't know, what Israelis don't know, is what is going to happen in that situation.
Now, this story has so many elements, as Anna was describing. The movement of people is one. Let's switch to India to talk about another, the movement of medicine, because Indian authorities are now limiting the export of 26 key ingredients for drugs, including paracetamol. That's because of increased fears of global shortages of a range of commonly used drugs. BBC's Shranjit Lail is in Singapore with more on this.
Indian drug makers, we know, are amongst the world's largest supplier of generic drugs, so it's incredibly worrying that they've restricted exports of some 26 key ingredients in medicines. All of this comes as drug ingredient makers in China remain shut or have cut output amid the coronavirus crisis. India's drug makers actually rely on China for nearly 70% of the active ingredients in their medicines. And industry experts have warned that they are likely to face shortages if this coronavirus epidemic continues. Now, analysts say that there are indications that the scarcity of the ingredients is already forcing up prices. But the Indian government has urged calm over its announcement and said there were enough stocks to last for up to 3 months.
Moshe Ranjit in Singapore, and we were focusing on India as well. Next we switch to the United States, because there have been, well, we're not switching to the United States, but the map decided to go there in the end. But we need to focus on Washington, because 10 people have died from the coronavirus in the Seattle area. That's out of 39 reported cases. Just over an hour ago, it was reported that another person has died in California. Let's bring in Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo from Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, live with us from the US. Jennifer, good to speak to you again. What's your assessment of this outbreak in Washington State?
It's a really tough situation, particularly because it seems to be centered around a long-term care facility, which obviously houses people that are particularly vulnerable to severe illness and death. So it's a very unfortunate situation.
And how does the situation there play into decisions that are having to be made at a federal level about how this virus is handled in the US?
Well, I think, first of all, it should point to the need to protect vulnerable populations like long-term care facilities, nursing homes, group settings where people have underlying health conditions that could make them more likely to experience severe illness. That should be the top of our list. But it's hard to sort of generalize just the case numbers and death numbers from Washington to other places. Obviously, places with those facilities remain at risk, but it doesn't necessarily speak to the risk to the general public.
And just in the last few minutes, we've talked about China, which is obviously restricting people's movements, Israel, which is restricting who can come into the country, Italy, which is closing schools and universities. Do you think any of those kind of measures will be applied in America anytime soon?
Well, we're still obviously looking at travel, and I think that countries that are doing this is increasingly becoming futile, because as we continue to learn, we don't have a great sense of where in the world the virus is and where it isn't. So I think these attempts to increasingly add to our list of countries for whom travel may be restricted or screening is done, it's just going to be untenable and not effective. I expect we will see school closures. It's not clear to me how much of a public health impact this will have, but I think from a political sense, there will be strong calls for it. I just hope that in thinking through these measures, we evaluate the potential negative outcomes as well as what benefits we think they may have.
And Jennifer, looking at this from a global perspective, it can be hard for me and for lots of other people to assess the speed at which this virus is spreading, because we're not expert at judging that speed. As you look at it, help us understand what you make of the pace of change with this story.
Well, we've always believed that it's possible for this virus to spread rapidly and silently, so that we would see cases turn up and then a rapid expansion of cases. That said, a note of caution in terms of interpreting when countries report cases. Often it's because they are just starting to look, and as they expand surveillance, we will see a rapid increase in cases simply because they're finally gaining a window into what's happening. So it's a little bit hard to interpret the reports to say that this situation is getting worse. That said, I expect that every country will see cases, and most communities will see them at some point.
Jennifer, thank you very much. We always appreciate your help. There's Jennifer live with us from the US. Now, from the start of this coronavirus outbreak, this has always been the message.
And this is certainly not a moment for panic or high anxiety. It is a moment for vigilance.
But not everyone's taking that advice. This is Sydney, and in Australia and New Zealand, the hashtag toilet paper gate has been trending. People were posting pictures like this and like this. There was one report that police in Sydney were called after a knife was pulled in an argument over toilet roll. We also know some supermarkets, this is Woolworths, have introduced a 4-pack limit for each customer. Now, this rush on toilet paper is happening, let's remember, in Australia, which has 2 deaths from 42 cases, and New Zealand, where there are 2 cases. So nowhere near the level of the outbreak we've seen in other places in the world. And bear in mind that manufacturers say there is no shortage of toilet paper whatsoever. But the story on the shelves is quite different. This is one Australian shopper.
This is Coles North Rocks toilet paper aisle. Absolutely none left.
So that's toilet rolls. Next, condoms, more empty shelves in Australia, in part we think driven by images like this, which apparently show people in Singapore putting a condom on their finger before they touch things like buttons in lifts. Now, it's very hard to establish whether this is really happening a great deal, but we do know condoms are definitely selling out in some places, and panic buying is also affecting hand sanitizers, face masks, goggles, to the great frustration of those who actually need this kind of stuff. Here's the US Surgeon General saying hoarding may pull from limited supply for hospitals, and this is what the International Monetary Fund is saying.
I cannot emphasize enough how urgent it is for authorities to lean forward in funding outbreak-related health spending and the need to match demand with supply of the necessary protective and treatment health products.
And for all the advice on not hoarding, the buying very much goes on and the prices continue to go up. Here's a bottle of Germex hand sanitizer, currently selling for almost $70 on Amazon. $70, that's 10 times its normal price. Or there's this set of 20 respiratory masks from 3M. That'll cost you $387 instead of the usual $15. Now, these masks are at least the standard that health authorities use. The extra twist is that lots of people are paying lots of money for basic surgical and paper masks, and they're not even going to help you. Here's Fergus Walsh.
Little paper face masks aren't really much good. They may give a false sense of security. Leave them, I would suggest, to the medical staff because they need to be changed frequently. They are quite good at preventing someone with an infection from passing it on. That's traditionally how they've been used. But those people really now should be staying at home.